Hello, crafty friends. It's Jessica here. Welcome back to Jessie Kate Creates. In this video, I am going to be recreating this card with a different color scheme. I made this Halloween themed shaker birthday card and I loved it so much. And as soon as it was done, I thought this would be really fun in a different color scheme. So that's what we're doing today. So to start, I have a piece of 80-pound cardstock that is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, although the size here doesn't really matter. You just need a piece that is large enough to cut out with a border die. Here I'm using the Penny Black Stamps Zigzag Stackers die. I think this cuts the panel down to be about 4 by 5 1/4. So if you don't have a die, you could also just use a piece of cardstock cut down to 4 by 5 1/4. But I like the zigzag detail that this adds. It's super fun. So once we have our panel cut out, next we need to add a sentiment that is going to eventually be the shaker portion of the card. I'm making my own sentiment here. I have this alphabet die from my stash. It's by Memento. I don't think it's available anymore. But the shaker portion of my card is going to say boo. So I grabbed the B and the O and I'm going to cut these out. I'm using a T-squared ruler to help me get these dies on here straight, and I'm just taping them down. Now, when I'm doing projects like this and I need to repeat a letter, I like to work from the outside in. Once I cut this out, it's going to be a lot easier for me to center that O in the middle of the letters than if I tried to get the spacing right, just working from the right to the left. I hope that makes sense. So now that I have these two letters cut out, I'm just going to bring that O die back and cut out that center one as well. Again, using my T-squared ruler just to get everything lined up nicely, although you could totally eyeball it, or you could purposely make things kind of crooked for a more fun kind of whimsical look. So now I'm going to set this panel to the side, and while I still have my alphabet dies out, I'm going to cut the letters out of some silver metallic cardstock. What I have here is from Michael's, but you could really use any cardstock in your stash. Now that I'm thinking about it, this would also be really cute with some black glitter cardstock. Okay, next we're going to move on to some ink blending. So I have just grabbed some nice fun Halloween colors. I have a black, a green, an orange, and 2 different purples. I'll talk about the purples in just a moment. I want every corner of the card to be a different color. So I'm starting with the black. I want the corner to be where the color is darkest, and then I want it to kind of fade out to white. And the black here is Black Soot by Distress Ink. These colors aren't all going to blend nicely with each other, so it's just easier to have them blend into white. So for this green, this is Parsley by Concord and Ninth. And you can see I'm not taking this green all the way into the black. I'm leaving a little gap of a white where they kind of meet in the middle. And right here, I'm just showing you how I remove the foam from my tools without getting my hands dirty by using a pair of tweezers. Next up is orange. This is Marmalade by Concord and Ninth. And again, just doing that same thing, not bringing it all the way into the green because that would make an unpleasant color. I'm just letting it fade off into white. Now for the purple, I'm starting with Highland Heather by Stampin' Up. This is a really nice soft purple, so it's going to be easier to blend it into white. Next, I'm grabbing Eggplant by Concord and Ninth. This is a much deeper purple, and for me, it's easy to get carried away. So it was easier to start with a light purple and then just make the corner a little darker with this dark purple color. For the initial card that I first showed you, I just used different pinks and oranges that were in my stash, but really any colors would work for a card like this. Okay, so now that all the ink blending is done, I decided I wanted to add a little bit of splatter to this card. So I grabbed a stamp block and I'm just adding a little bit of black acrylic paint and some water to thin it out. And I added my panel to a shoebox. That's what I use for a splat box. And I am just going to tap the paintbrush to add splatter all over this background. You can add as much or as little as you want. I tend to like a lot of splatter, so for me this was on the conservative side, but you do what works for you. Once I'm done with all of that splatter, I took the panel and set it to the side and allowed it to dry. And while the panel is drying, we are going to make our own ghosts because I didn't have any dies for that. So to make some DIY ghosts, I have a scrap of 100-pound cardstock here. And when you think about it, the shape of a ghost is pretty simple. It's a round top and a squiggly bottom. At least the ghosts I was going for. So I am not like an artist. Like I'm not good at drawing things by any means, but I thought this shape was simple enough that I could do it. So I'm here just kind of freehanding the shape of a ghost. And for my card, you saw with the first one, I wanted a smaller ghost and a larger ghost. So for the second one, just the same thing, but a little smaller. And if you think this is a little bit too much freehanding, then hang tight, because just in a second, I'm going to show you another way you can do this that is even simpler. Because I promise you, even if you can't draw, you can make these simple little ghosts. Okay, so the first two are done. The second option is you want to grab a small bottle. I happen to have this Distress Reinker on my desk. I'm tracing the bottle, and basically from the widest part of that circle, I'm just drawing straight lines down on either side, and then just some little squiggles at the bottom. I promise you can do this, and it makes for some very cute, very adorable little ghosts, very much in the style of Pac-Man, I would say. For the smaller ghost on this one, I'm doing the same thing, but I'm making it a little bit shorter, and when I cut this out, I'm going to cut on the inside of the pencil line to make sure that it ends up being just a little bit smaller. I also want to let you guys know this footage here is sped up, so it did take me a little longer to do this, but for the sake of time, I've cut it down a bit. So now the next step is to go ahead and fussy cut these here. I'm just taking my time, and pro tip when it comes to fussy cutting, keep your scissors relatively still and move the paper. That really helps get good curves without a lot of sharp points, kind of like you see me doing here. And then once that's done, I'm just going to flip it over and use the back side so I don't have to worry about erasing pencil marks. So I went ahead and cut out all of my ghosts, and then it was time to really dress them up. So I'm starting by just penciling on some cute little smiles, just eyes and a smile. Next, I'm going to add a little bit of shading to these. I'm using Dove by Concord and Ninth. This is just a super light gray color, and I'm just using it to ink up the edges of the die. I think this would be, or not the die, we made this ourselves, our little ghosts. This would also be really cute if you used like a blue ink maybe, or like a purple. Really anything goes here. That's what they're looking like. So I inked the edges of all my ghosts, and then I needed to add some rosy cheeks. So I am bringing in an R20 Copic marker. Any light pink would work here. And then I'm coming back over it with a colorless blender just to soften those cheeks a little bit. I added the cheeks to all of my ghosts. And the next thing to do was to ink in their smiles. I'm just using a regular old black pen for this, drawing on those smiles. And then I went back and erased the pencil lines from the smiles. And the last step for the ghosts is to add on some eyes. I have a black glaze pen here. The tip gets kind of crusty sometimes, so I always like to squiggle it off first. And then I'm just going to tap a couple little dots for the eyes of the ghosts. The fun thing about this pen is it dries like super shiny, which is really fun. So once I did that to all my ghosts, they were complete. How cute are those guys? And they were super easy to make. So now moving on to the sentiment, I have this Just a Number stamp set from Close to My Heart. One of the sentiments in here says age is just a number, and the other one says yours will remain unlisted, which I thought was super cute. So I took the first half of that sentiment, age is just a number, and I silver heat embossed that onto a scrap of 100-pound cardstock. All of my sentiment dies were too thin to cut this out, but I realized that the very smallest rectangle in the Pink and Main A7 layered rectangles fit perfectly. So I went ahead and used that to cut out my sentiment, as you can see here. And now it's time to work on making my shaker pocket. So I'm bringing back in my panel, and I have a piece of clear acetate that I cut down to be about the same size as the panel. Now I'm going to adhere this with some dry adhesive. You could use wet glue for this, but when I'm working with acetate, I find it sticks better to dry adhesive, but use whatever you have on hand. I am using a couple dots of wet glue where I want to make sure that the panel isn't going to flap up. And then I'm burnishing this in really well just to make sure that the acetate is well adhered to my panel. Once that's done, I realized that the acetate overhung the panel a little bit, but it's a super easy fix. I'm just taking a pair of scissors and I'm going to go ahead and trim that down. Once that part is ready to go, it's time to puzzle piece in the letters of the sentiment. Oh, actually, before I do that, I am removing any fingerprints from my acetate with a microfiber cloth. It's just the kind you use to clean eyeglasses because I wear eyeglasses, so I always have those on hand. But to add in these letters, I am just putting the tiniest little dots of wet glue behind the letters, and then they're just going to fit in place like a little puzzle piece. So it's really easy to add those on. And I did the other two letters off camera, but once that's done, I'm adding foam tape to the back of the panel. I was very generous with the foam tape because I don't want any sagging here. I kept it all open, so it's one shaker pocket, but I did put a lot of foam tape back there so nothing will sag. To close off my shaker, I am going to use a leftover scrap of white glitter cardstock. If I can find a link for this, I'll put it down in the comments below, along with links for everything I used if I can find them. Now for my shaker bits, I am making my own glitter mix here. I have a ton of glitter in my stash, so I just went through and picked out colors that matched the colors already on the card. So we have some purple, some green, some orange, a really pretty like iridescent black, and some silver. Of course, you could use whatever you wanted on the inside of your shaker card, but since I had all of these colors, I thought it would be really fun to make my own little custom glitter mix for the card. Now, before I add the glitter in, this is my secret weapon to making shaker cards. You are going to wipe down the acetate with a dryer cloth. This is going to remove the static so that the glitter doesn't cling to the acetate, and it's going to move and shake beautifully. So I pulled off the foam tape and I'm just using this little scoop to add in my glitter. I didn't include this on camera, but when I was putting those bottles of glitter away, I did spill the purple one all over my little glitter drawer. If you follow me on Instagram, then you saw a shot of that in my stories. So instead of pouring this in, I decided to use the little scoop instead. You just want to make sure you don't get a ton of glitter on the foam tape. A couple pieces here and there will be fine, but you just don't want to make sure it doesn't get covered in glitter. So now to close off this pocket, I am adding on my glitter cardstock. And I have a couple extra scraps of the glitter cardstock that I'm just going to put over the rest of the foam that is showing. It'll just make this easier to adhere to my card base a little bit later on. You could use any scrap paper you have on hand for that part though. And look at that. You see how the glitter is moving and shaking and it's not clinging to the acetate? That's because we used that dryer sheet. Now I'm just trimming off any of the glitter cardstock that is showing. And now we have all of the pieces parts made, and it's time to assemble this card. So I'm going to start with the sentiment. I kind of like to, I already know the layout of this card because I've made it before, but when it's my first time making a card, I always like to kind of put the elements down where I think I want them to go to make sure everything looks good. So that's what I'm doing here. Next, I'm going to add foam tape to the sentiment and go ahead and pop that up. And anytime I use foam tape, I like to put a little bit of glue on the back just to give myself a little bit of wiggle room to make sure things are positioned exactly how I want them to be. For the smallest ghost, I'm going to adhere this down flat to the card. And then for the bigger ghost, I am going to pop that up on some foam tape. Again, just putting a little bit of glue behind it to make sure I get it how I want it to be on the card. Doesn't this look so cute? So for the background on the card, I have a piece of glitter cardstock that is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. So it is the same size as an A2 panel. And I'm just going to adhere that onto a white A2 sized card base. And this is going to be the background for the card. Once that's adhered, again, I'm just kind of testing the positioning of the panel before I add it on. And I'm just using some wet glue for this. I was really happy with how this came out. I did like the pink and orange card that I first made, but as soon as I made that card, I saw this one in my head and I was really excited with how well this turned out. Okay, so for a finishing touch on the front of the card, I had these black gems in my stash. I almost never used them, but I thought this was the perfect chance. So I got them positioned and I just adhered those down with a little bit of wet glue. Now for the inside of the card, I just have a panel that is 4 by 5 1/4, and I'm stamping the second half of that sentiment. It just says yours will remain unlisted. And I thought this was a cute card. It's a nice funny sentiment, a little bit of a zinger. So I thought that was just a really fun sentiment. Now, when I stamped that, I'm freehanding it here. It was crooked, but this is just paper. So I flipped it over and stamped it again. I'm just using VersaFine Onyx Black ink here. And then I'm just gonna adhere that to the inside of the card with a little bit of wet glue. I don't typically send Halloween cards, so this was a fun way to use a Halloween theme to make a birthday card that I would send or might sell at a craft fair. Now, if you've seen my videos before, then you know the very last step for us now is to create a matching envelope. And at first I wasn't going to do that. I was just going to use this orange envelope. I get my envelopes from clearbags.com. I will have them linked down below. But I thought, you know what, I can just try drawing the ghost on the front of the envelope as well. And it's just the exact same technique that I used to make the ghost for the front of the card. Looking back at this, I wish I had included the entire ghost instead of just the head of the ghost, but that's okay. Now here you're going to see me mess up. I set this aside to dry before I erased the pen, but one of his eyes wasn't fully dry, so you can see it made a streak. So I grabbed my Tombow Mono sand eraser and I was like, oh, please come off. And it did. It took me a minute of kind of rubbing the paper with this abrasive eraser, but it did come off. You can't see it well on camera, but it left a light spot and I didn't think it looked very nice. So I thought, okay, well, maybe I can blend some ink over the top of it so you won't even notice it. So I masked off my little ghost with some mint tape, and then I came in with the same blender that I used for the front of my card, and I'm just using the residual ink that is left on that blending foam. I'm not adding any new ink, and this worked. It darkened the entire ghost, which makes it pop on the envelope a little bit more, and it also covered up our little problem spot. So that was a nice little happy accident because I like the way this dark ghost looks on the front of the envelope. Beautiful. So now we have our matching envelope for our card. So here is a little close-up of our completed card with our fun DIY ghosts, our little shaker pocket. I am so in love with how this card turned out, and I do think this sentiment is a really fun one. And it was definitely the inspiration for this card. And then also a little close-up of the first card I made. I used the exact same techniques to make this card. It's just the colors are different. Instead of silver, I used gold. And for the colors, I just used pink and orange. But I think they both look adorable. I really enjoyed making these cards. I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video. I hope you got some sort of helpful tip or trick that you can use in the craft room. If you liked the video, be sure to like it and subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell so you don't miss any of my upcoming videos. See you soon. Bye.